I'm Paul Ross, and this is Kelly Dro Wilcox. We're both product managers with the ArcGIS Online team. And so the topic this morning is just a couple of key concepts for developers. That would be sharing and authentication. I'm going to start out more broadly and talk about a couple of other things that are available to you as developers, just to make sure we aren't forgetting anything, because there's a lot of stuff in ArcGIS Online, things that you can use in your applications and solutions that you're building. And then Kelly's going to talk about sharing concepts and authentication. And then just for fun, we have a release coming up on the 19th, and I thought I'd touch on a couple of things that are coming, maybe get some excitement, and then I'm sure we'll have time for questions at the end and cover whatever else or whatever you guys want to know about in ArcGIS Online between the two of us. I'm sure we can figure it out and answer or whatever.
And just to add a little context to kind of how we designed this session this year is we really want to talk about some of the concepts of ArcGIS Online that aren't covered in other sessions. So there's not going to be a big fat focus on mapping. It's really what's available in ArcGIS Online and how as developers you can understand the sharing model and identity so that you can really use those in your applications or with other users.
All right, so with that, we'll get started. So ArcGIS Online overall, and we won't spend a lot of time on this, but it is a super high growth area. Obviously, it's our software as a service in the cloud. The key focuses are mapping, analytics, collaboration, which we're going to spend a lot of time on today with the sharing concepts. And then, of course, one of the things it does really well is enables field mobility, and a lot of things you can do there. Lots of growth. There are over 200,000 organizations, subscriptions using ArcGIS Online. We get about 12,000 new users per day to the system, so it's continuing to rapidly grow. That has not ever slowed down. And between all of those users, about 46,000 new items per day, and an item being somebody posts a layer, a web map, applications, hosting data, that kind of thing. Typically, we see 12,000 people logging on per hour. So just to give you an idea of the scale of that we're seeing, and it's worldwide. It's not something that ever slows down. Maybe there's a bit of a delay at the end of the day here, but that's about it. And then, interestingly enough, one of the big, most valuable things with ArcGIS Online is how it can scale. So probably right now, if we looked, it's probably running between 4,000 and 5,000 requests per second. If there's a big event going on in the world, whether it be somebody's election or a hurricane or a marathon, something along those lines, we can see as high as like 7,000 requests per second. So it'll just scale to meet those needs, which is one of the benefits of using ArcGIS Online. You don't have to worry about scaling up your infrastructure, so that's kind of a big deal. So let's just touch on, as Kelly said, there's a couple of aspects here. We're not going to do a deep dive into each of these. We want to focus on the sharing and collaboration piece. But one of the things that ArcGIS Online does best is mapping and visualization. So you can create those great maps for your applications. You can visualize content, use content that from somewhere else, move it in there. Lots of great hooks to bring your own content and your own data, and then you can, of course, enrich that with lots of information like demographics that we've got to really add context to your data. On top of, underlying all of it is base maps and the living atlas and content that's there. So we work with tons of authoritative sources. Many of our customers provide and share their content. We go out and buy content, but we make sure it's from really, really high quality sources, because the applications that we're building typically are not just consumer applications. They're really need much better accuracy, much better in terms of accuracy, as well as just that they're up to date. The other part is data management, and this is an area where if you've been following with ArcGIS Online over the past couple of releases, we've worked hard to really expand on this. So it's not just an area where you can take your content, put it in once, you create a layer, you're creating an application. No, we've got some great tools now, both at the API level and within the interface itself, to keep content up to date. And that doesn't mean lots of manual moving things around. You can always just look at sources and update them or refresh them all the time. So we've had an ever increasing number of sources too that you can bring into ArcGIS Online to do that. On top of that, analytics. And again, this isn't all encompassing. These are just kind of probably the most important things for developers. You can do things on understanding your content or providing understanding through analytics in your application to take advantage of what's there. Things like finding the best locations, how places are related, looking for patterns, making predictions. And that can be done in a couple of different ways. You can use insights to do that. You can use the analytics within the map viewer. Of course, probably most appropriately for this group is via the APIs. I talked about content for just a second. This is a huge area, and one that I think you probably already get a lot of value out of, but it's Esri content. We do that through the Living Atlas of the World, which is tens of thousands of layers that we put in there, and it's not just base maps either. There's one of the most important areas we have is kind of real-time observations. So good examples, traffic and weather data. Think about how those kind of things can really enhance your applications. Imagery, we spend invest a lot of money in purchasing imagery. We keep ramping that up. We're watching carefully about where people are asking for imagery and doing a better job of keeping that up to date all the time, as well as higher resolution imagery. There's also partner content in there, so our partners provide content. Some of that content can be found through the marketplace. There's a premium for some of that, but if you need a little bit more, there's lots of options. So between Esri, our customers, and partners, there is absolute ton of content in there to be used for your applications. So in terms of building applications, I'm not going to talk at all about this one. There's really three ways. There's the templates that we have. You can do very simple things with the templates. I'm actually increasingly not so simple. We have our builders like Web App Builder. And then we also have story maps, and then probably what most of you are doing is building custom applications. But again, all of those are available to you as developers. You can do lots of interesting things with the templates. You want to go a little bit further, you can do, still stay in the kind of no coding area and use Web App Builder and story maps, and then custom applications, of course. And if you haven't seen the developer site, well, I'm sure you all have. That's just a fantastic resource for all of you. Just to call out a couple of other things here. If you haven't looked at Operations Dashboard, this is a really powerful thing that you can add value to with your application, to what solutions you're providing to your end customers, all web-based. You can add maps, charts, diagrams, all kinds of really useful things. They can be used as public dashboards, or they can be used within organizations or just for a couple of folks that you might share within a group, and we'll talk about that. One thing that we don't spend a lot of time talking about, and there's separate sessions for, but it's something that's very important, is administration and security. So the administrative stuff is managing users, managing content, monitoring what's going on with that, and we'll talk about some of those because it's very much related to authentication. But these are just things. We have an entire security team that works across the platform, looking at compliance issues, making sure we're compliant so the governments can use us, and of course, all those kind of compliance and certification things benefit all of us. And we have a team that just continues to move those forward. I would encourage you that we have a site called trust.arcgis.com. If you have questions about security, or somebody you are providing your software to wants to know a bit more or a lot more about the platform or ArcGIS Online and how things are architected and put together, absolutely hit us. We'll help you out, because we know sometimes we want to make sure we have a security person talking to a security person. We can absolutely enable that and keep talking that through. So couple of key concepts for developers, and then we'll dive into the sharing and collaboration. So, excuse me, providing you with APIs and components that we actually use ourselves. So everything in ArcGIS Online is built with the components that we provide to developers. JavaScript and runtime have been re-engineered around WebGIS, so you see a lot of that. It's simpler and easier to use. Support for 3D, lots of UI and business logic in there, and a simple and consistent API design across the way. One opportunity we'd like to point out, and especially if you've started to hear what we're talking about with notebooks, is certainly with Python. Lots of things that can be done there. So with that as kind of a general overview and some other things, Kelly's going to dive into identities and collaboration. Cool.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So Paul just covered a lot of really great content about what ArcGIS Online does, and the types of items and content that you can create or have access to. Really what the gatekeeper of kind of who can access what comes down to your ArcGIS Online identity. So that's kind of the core component of our sharing and our licensing. So what does an ArcGIS Online identity do? It's really your username and password into the ArcGIS Online system. It provides access to key features, so that's managed by roles and the credits that are defined for a user. They also control how you get access to apps, so software licenses. With the new user types, which I'll cover a little bit later, this has changed a little bit from previous years, but it's still attached to identity, whether you can access specific apps or not. Your identity also connects you to the Esri system. So my Esri, if Esri access is enabled, that you can use the same login and identity to look at GeoNet, log support tickets, or take training. Also provides access to the sharing model. Your identity is anything that is shared with your actual username is something that you can access, or something that you would share with another username is how you're going to control access to items. One thing to keep in mind is there's really no security without identity. That's the way that we keep things secure, is we have to ask users to identify themselves with their username and password before we can actually go through and make sure that they're getting access to the right components that their administrator has set up, or that they're getting access to the right content. So identity is really that important piece that ties all of the different systems together in ArcGIS Online.
I think we get that question. How can I securely or privately share something with someone who doesn't have an identity? Well, you can't. You don't really, unless you're building it outside in your application, but through the system, that's exactly how you do it.
Yeah. And then with collaboration, it's really how do you collaborate with other users in the system? So are you collaborating with users inside your own organization, in other organizations? Who are you collaborating with? Do you know who that user is? Do you not? And then can you trust the person? So these are the kinds of things that identity really helps with. So in the December release of ArcGIS Online and in the upcoming release of ArcGIS Enterprise, we've released this new idea of ArcGIS user types. So this should be very similar to what you had seen before if you were using ArcGIS Online before with level 1 and level 2 users. What they do is they include capability and apps with the identity, which can still be modified to meet the needs. So we've got 5 ArcGIS users, and then there's a new Insights user that has access to Insights. So the first one is the viewer. This is identical to the level 1 user, previous level 1 user, and they have viewing capabilities to the essential apps. The editor and the field worker have access to editing capabilities within the system, along with viewing capabilities, and then they also have access to different sets of apps. So the editor has access to the ArcGIS essential apps, and the field worker has access to both the essential apps and the field apps bundle. So that's something, those are apps like Collector, Survey 123, and Workforce for ArcGIS. When we start moving into the authoring capabilities of our user types, we've got 2 that fall into these capabilities, being the creator and the GIS professional. And these have access to all of the capabilities within the ArcGIS system right now. They also come with different sets of apps. So the creator comes with ArcGIS Essential Apps, Field Apps bundle, and the Office apps, whereas the GIS Professional has access to all of those apps, plus ArcGIS Pro comes included with it. There's 3 levels of the GIS Professional, being basic, standard, or advanced. And there's no additional licensing needed to assign Pro to the GIS Professional.
So stay here for just a sec. So let's think about this from a developer. Why does this matter? So before the December release, if you were going to include identity using ArcGIS Online, you had 2 choices. You could use a viewer, which could just see the content that's shared with them. That's it. They can't do anything else. Or it was the complete other end, where you had somebody who could basically do everything, the creator or the level 2. Obviously, there's a couple of things that we've made easier with these new user types. One is that you could control before the privileges through custom roles, and people could create custom roles that had some kind of other features or capabilities, but you couldn't limit access to the apps. So that was one thing. The other thing is, regardless that you created those custom roles, it was still going to cost you the cost of a creator or level 2 to provide those, even though you might be taking away a whole bunch of the functionality. So what was occurring is that there was almost this pent-up demand for things that were kind of in between. So the one was, I just need somebody to edit, or from a developer standpoint, I want to provide somebody with the capabilities of editing, but they're really not doing anything else. That's part of my application, or one of the user types that I have within my application. The other was, we have a whole field force out there collecting content, using your applications to collect content. But that's what they're doing. They're not creating maps, story maps, applications, and things like that. So those are the 2 big ones in between viewer and creator. And then we decided, well, let's go the other way too. Let's add a whole bunch of functionality and include Pro, because those higher end, more GIS types of functions and operations, we want to provide that too. So this gives you a bigger bandwidth at different price points that you can bring in as well. So it's not all or nothing functionality, but it's not all or nothing either in terms of price and including it in your application.
All right, so I mentioned the app bundles a few times, but app bundles are a new concept with user types, where we bundle apps that are used commonly together to provide access to our users. So one in particular to pay attention to is this ArcGIS Essentials apps, and it provides access to a lot of the mapping capabilities within ArcGIS Online. So all of the user types that we just went over include the essential apps. So again, not much of a change, but it does have some applications for this new concept of user types available through the partners team. So you can take a look at that with if your partners talk to Thomas Fair.
So in terms of why would you want these app bundles? Well, let's say you wanted to include some of them along with the solutions that you're providing. So instead of building your own survey tools, you use Collector or Survey 123, and then you have some other application that you're building, you can build on top of that. So that would be, you can always put these bundles on top of the user types.
So we've got the essential apps, which are really those ArcGIS Online essential apps. We've got the Field Apps bundle, which includes Collector, Survey 123, and Workforce. And then the Office Apps bundle, which has maps, ArcGIS Maps for Office and ArcGIS Maps for SharePoint. So these are bundles of applications that can be either included with the user type or added onto a user type. And then we've got partner user types, and that's something to chat with the partner team about. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between a user type and a user role. And a user role is not necessarily a user type. Now, a lot of the user types that we have created are based off of roles and personas within organizations, which usually has similar wording to roles, but they have a different purpose. So a user type is the identity and capabilities that you or your users have access to out of the box. So it's kind of the open slate. The user role is what's defined by the administrator, which can contain some or all of the user type's capabilities. So there's still that ability to define exactly what your users can access. If you don't want a creator publishing content and sharing it publicly, you can still control that through the user roles and just apply those to a user type. So really when you're creating an identity and inviting a user to ArcGIS Online, you need to think about both the user type and the user role. In every organization, there needs to be at least one administrator. So the user types that can be administrators are the creator and the GIS professional.
Yeah, so when you get a user type, or you're including one of those user types in your application that you're putting together, don't think of it as, oh, we have to take on all these capabilities.
It's okay, Kate.
There you go. Okay. You don't have to take on all those capabilities. You can actually continue to use custom roles to further define that. So none of that part changed.
All right. And I just wanted to show how we've done this in the UI to explain how user types relate to the capabilities available through user roles. So if you take a look at the settings and create a role, we now have this privilege compatibility option at the bottom.
What do you want to do?
Scroll down. Sorry, I'm not a Mac user. I really struggle with the Macs.
2 fingers.
2 fingers, okay. All right, so what we have is this privilege capability, meter. Yeah. And what it does is it shows you which privileges can actually be assigned for which user type, or which capabilities that you need. So we've got this view, manage, create, view, edit, manage, and create piece, which is what can be applied to our creators and GIS professionals. Look at that, I'm doing it. So you can see that you can assign all of these privileges to that user. If you want to, let's say, take a look at privileges that are available to users who can just view and edit, so that would be the editors and the field workers, you'll see that a lot of the privileges have actually been grayed out, which you can't assign to a user with that role. So, so editors and field workers, they can't create or update content. They can't publish hosted feature layers. They can't share content, but they can join groups, they can view members, and they can edit features. Then with the view, you can see that there's even fewer privileges that they can access, and that the edit capability, the edit privilege isn't available for the viewers. But they still have access to things like geocoding, if there's geocoding in an application, or using the demographic services. So they can use all of the content within an application that's provided. They're just not able to create content or edit it.
So would you have to check those boxes for them to have those privileges?
Yeah, so the way that a role is created is, mouse gets me every time. What you'd have to do to, let's say, create a role is you can toggle them all on, and then what you would do is save the role.
Or take any out.
Or take any out. And then what you can do is assign the role to a user. So I can find a user in here. And then this would make Ian have the specific role that I just created. Those are so helpful.
So as you can see too, you can do it one by one, or you can do it a group of people. So that makes it easier.
All right. So that's really how you kind of change the privileges that someone has access to.
One role for one user?
Yeah, it's one role for one user.
Right, but you can create a role and assign it to multiple people. So quite often people in organizations have the same set of privileges, so you just would assign that, Yeah.
So if you had, let's say, a set of GIS analysts who were creating content within an organization. You could set up a GIS analyst role that had all of the privileges that you want for users of that who perform those tasks, and then just use those same privileges in that same role on multiple users.
So, and one thing to point out is that this is if you want to do this, you can certainly take those user types as is and provide them in your app. It's only if you want to take something away, remove a privilege that, I don't want this person to geocode or whatever it is. That's when you can use these to take those things away, just to make sure people aren't bumping into areas they shouldn't be doing.
All right.
You can select a group of people by a group and assign the role to them. So, yeah. But you can't just assign a person to a group and they inherit a role.
So I'll talk briefly about the authentication capabilities that we have available through ArcGIS Online. So there's really 3 ways of storing identity or managing the identity store within ArcGIS Online. So one is using the ArcGIS Online identity store. So that's where you just create a username. ArcGIS Online itself manages the identity, so it does the authentication, confirms whether the username and password is correct. We've also got enterprise logins, so that's where you can actually connect your existing enterprise systems to ArcGIS Online and use your existing system to authenticate using OAuth and SAML. And then social logins, so there is the ability to allow users to use social logins. So if they want to use Facebook or Google Plus as their identity store, that's also available to users within ArcGIS Online.
So there's something kind of interesting here is we're looking at some statistics about number of subscriptions that use each one of these types. 80% of the subscriptions use online authentication, 20% enterprise logins, and then there's a smaller bit that are using social logins. That's at the subscription level, but if you look at the number of people, it's almost equal that are using online and enterprise, because the enterprise subscriptions are much larger. So what that points out is that your larger customers, your enterprise customers, are very likely going to have security requirements where you're going to want to use their authentication, and fortunately we've got that as part of it. Social logins, the use case around those is typically I'm bringing in a consultant into my subscription. I don't want to make them part of my enterprise login system, so we'll just do it that way. All of these can be used in conjunction with together. In other words, it's not picking 1, 2, or 3. You can actually use parts of all of this across the system, and it works fine.
All right. Let's talk about that. Yeah. So there's a few additional options for managing authentication and security. So one, multi-factor authentication is available in ArcGIS Online. So that's just something that you need to set up in your organization to make available for users. So if you need that extra step of having multi-factor authentication, it is available. We also have a password policy. So within an ArcGIS Online organization, you can set what the requirements are for your passwords, whether they need to be a certain length, whether they need to be reset every 30 days, every 90 days, and then also what kind of special characters are required. In the next release of ArcGIS Online, we're adding some additional security measures to passwords, where we'll start looking for the strength of passwords, the weakness of passwords, based on a library of commonly used and hacked passwords. So there'll be some additional information available to users who are creating passwords, and when you're inviting users, of the password strength and then the required password strength for passwords. All right. So when we're looking at authentication methods, when you're creating your own applications, there's really 2 methods to look at when creating your own applications. One is a named user login, and the other is an app login. So the named user login is where you would require your customers to log in using their own ArcGIS Online username and password. So this is required for listings on the marketplace, And the users need to have an ArcGIS Online organizational account, not a public account. This is where the user is going to be using the sharing model to determine access to this content. It's also used when you're using kind of subscriber content within applications. Some of the content that we provide, you need to have an ArcGIS Online username. So things like the traffic service, the hurricane layer that we provide through the Living Atlas. Sometimes your users need to provide credentials in order to view them. The other option is an app login. And this is where the developer or the partner authenticates for the user. So what this does is it makes it so that if there is private content on an application, the actual owner of the content or owner of the application is logging in on behalf of the user. So for this, when using the app login, any content or any charges incurred through the application are then taken on behalf of the person who has created this app login. For the app login, content must be publicly accessible. So it's really making this content public, but providing your own credentials in order for it to be public. We also recommend that the app secret, which is created in the developer site, isn't exposed in the source code. We always recommend using a proxy page. If someone does expose the app secret in their source code, it can easily be taken and used for other purposes. So we always recommend using a proxy page for that. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sharing and how our sharing model is architected. So really, ArcGIS Online, the geospatial cloud, and part of it can also be ArcGIS Enterprise, and we'll talk about how that fits in, is about this really large system of content and interconnected users in the cloud. Paul mentioned the 200,000 organizations. We have about 7 million users. Mm-hmm. We've got about 7 million users. So all of that content is available, and those users are available or accessible in the geospatial cloud and in ArcGIS Online. The sharing is what is really powerful to bring everything together so that anyone can access or not access content.
So if you think about this tangled web of content and applications and layers, and as a person who's putting an application together, one size doesn't fit all. You would want to share certain things with certain people, certain things with a group, certain things with organizations, certain things with the world, or not at all of any of those things. So the sharing concept that's built into the way ArcGIS Online works it's really fundamental. And understanding that, not so much that it's not a hard concept to understand, it's actually the value in understanding it is that you can use it in your applications. You can think about different groups of people that your application is serving, or maybe even different subscription levels for your application, or whatever it is. And so it gives you it's a very powerful feature to be able to use.
Another capability that's available through our sharing process is the code and the embedded code that can be embedded in a website. Most of the time when the public is accessing ArcGIS Online applications, they're embedded in another website. So that's really easy to do with ArcGIS Online. So if we start looking at the sharing model and collaborating with authenticated users, I think the first step to look at is private content. So when you're in ArcGIS Online and you're creating content, at first, without sharing anything, if it's private, only the creator of the content can view that, or an administrator within their organization. So that's really content that's available while it's being developed, doing data management, and doing some testing.
Unless you change anything, that's the way it's set.
Yeah. The next option for sharing is to be able to share with groups. So this is where you create a specific group and add members to that group. Anyone that has accepted the invitation as a member of the group is going to be able to access the content in the group, and then also be able to interact with the data or the application based on the capabilities in the application or on the layers. So if you want to have an editable layer, you'd share an editable layer with a group, and anyone in the group can edit that layer. The next op.
If that person in that group has a role, just a viewer, if he's in the group, if he's just a viewer, he's still in the other.
Yeah, if he's a viewer, so it's also controlled by the capability, by their user type and their privileges. So if they don't have editing privileges, then the editing capabilities won't be present to them. So that will be hidden, and they don't have permissions to submit edits.
So they could still be part of a group let's say, just take it really simple, a map is shared with them. So if they don't have, if they have the privileges, they can edit. If they were just a viewer, like you said, and they're still part of that group, they would just be able to see it. So say like an executive or something. It's one, yeah. Yep, no, it's a good question.
There's also the ability to share with the organization. So this is really great when you're creating an organization and really need a repository of shared data within the organization. So this is just an option where you can click share with the organization, and anyone within your organization can see this content. You can share content with both a group and the organization, but this capability is really fantastic, especially with the, I guess, newer content pages where you can just see content in your organization. The other thing that's used heavily is the ability to share with everyone. So that's creating content for public consumption. This is where you might want to share an application with your citizens. Maybe you created a really great Pokemon application. We have a lot of those out there. But this allows anyone to access the content that you're sharing.
So there's another concept here that I think is really important to point out too. Were you going to talk about views?
No.
Okay, so here's a really fantastic way to use a feature service. So I'll give you an example. So right now, there's a lot of flooding in Santa Barbara County in California. The storms just keep rolling in. There's a lot going on. Santa Barbara County has an evacuation map. So if we take this diagram, so there's the person that's putting together the evacuation map, right? Then there's a group of people that they're sharing it within the county who actually have the capability of editing that. So that's another view of the content. So you've got one feature service, one view might be for my editors, and I would share that view then through my organization. I can take that same feature service, but without the capabilities to edit, create a view that is then shared with the public, so that the public can now see the evacuation zones that goes the whole way through. So you've got one feature service that's multiple purposes here, and it's shared within different groups of people. So it's an extremely powerful way of doing things. Without that, how would you do that? I don't know. You'd copy it. You'd get some editing going on. You'd put some, like a third or a fourth service out there for what the public would see. But because of views and because of this sharing concept, you can just make it all work, and it's a very powerful concept.
So the next sharing step is sharing between infrastructure. So we've got this newer concept of distributed collaboration, or connecting systems within systems. So the ability with distributed collaboration is to take content from one system, being ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise, and copy that content to another system. So this can be really helpful for, let's say, app deployment. If you're developing an app on your enterprise and you want it to use the scalability of ArcGIS Online, you can manage your data in ArcGIS Enterprise while having that public version pushed on a regular basis to ArcGIS Online, or vice versa.
Yeah, so take that example that I was just talking about. Let's say instead they're using Pro to edit those evacuation zones, for example. Well, because it's a publicly accessible app that's just going to absolutely get hammered, people are going to be checking that thing constantly to really understand something very important. You obviously wouldn't want all that traffic coming back onto your own infrastructure, because you're trying to use it to create the maps in the first place. So how would you do this? You would set up a collaboration between your enterprise server and online. It would pick up and sync with that service on ArcGIS Online, which would then scale to however anybody was asking about, requests that are asking for it while you're over here working away and changing the evacuation zone, which would automatically get synced up and change your app and your layers. Is that a question?
We have more than 100 users in ArcGIS Online, and we have multiple portals going on throughout the world in our organizations. And we don't have any collaborations, but when we do the collaborations, our portals are connected to SDE, and all the contents in large data sets are copied to online. That means we will take up so much credit. So we will start losing, we have to start paying for that amount of data we are translating. So as the data grows, it won't be sustainable because each data set is connected to the database.
Right.
It has to be synchronized in order to copy the data.
Repeat the question.
That's the problem.
Yeah. So to repeat the question, it was that if you're using collaboration, when you copy data from the enterprise to online, you need to pay for storage. And if you're copying all of your content, that can become unsustainable. When you do collaborate between ArcGIS Enterprise and ArcGIS Online, you are in fact publishing a hosted feature layer in ArcGIS Online, so you will be charged credits for that. I guess you get to choose what you want to move to ArcGIS Online or collaborate through group sharing. So you can choose which content you're sharing. And I guess what I would say is collaborate and share the content that you need to have that the use of ArcGIS Online for. Like what is there a specific app that's running? Are you using that scalability? Once it's done, let's say it's a high volume evacuation map. Once that evacuation's over, you can always take that content out of ArcGIS Online and you'll stop being charged immediately. So it's really kind of what kind of content do you need in the do you need an ArcGIS Online, or what content do you want in ArcGIS Enterprise? And really what collaboration does is gives you the flexibility to easily move that content from system to system when you want to.
So if you don't, just one other solution, and I'm going to put this out there, but not knowing exactly what you're doing, we can talk later, but you can certainly reference services from Enterprise within ArcGIS Online, and they'll be referenced there and you won't create any storage at all. So that's another option. Now, if you're trying to keep things in sync, no, that doesn't work. That's why we're moving it over. But yeah. Okay.
All right, and so another part of ArcGIS Online is monitoring your organization. So I'm just going to review some tools. Thanks. Some tools that are available for monitoring tools, for monitoring the status of your organization. I hope this is a great lesson of me being really good at using Macs. All right, so if we take a look at the status page, you can see that you can get some information about what's happening in your organization in terms of credits, your content, and your members. It's a really great way to have an overview of what's happening in your organization. You can query the amount of usage or the amount of content that you've had using the date filters. So I'll take a look at all of February and March. And you're able to get a summary of what's been happening in your organization. So for this specific organization, most of my content and the credits that I'm using are based on feature storage because I do publish a lot of featured content. You can see here that someone also used quite a few credits for analysis in early February. So what's really great about these tools is you can drill in and find out a little bit more about what's happening in your organization. So if I click on the analytics section, I can get a little closer. I'll see a little bit more information about analytics on that day. Oh my goodness.
You click in the middle.
Click in the middle, okay. So it's great, I can see more information about someone using geo-enrichment. I can also click on it again and find out who did this. And turns out it was me doing some data enrichment, and I made 214 requests. So it's a really great way of kind of drilling into who's doing what on in your organization.
So one thing to point out here is that when we build these status tools or administrative tools, we're thinking about, in general, about how people would want to see this information. This is all available to you via the APIs. So if you would want to, within your applications, create any kind of dashboarding or additional usage statistics, there's a lot more in there that you can aggregate and put together and create your own. In fact, one of the reasons we did that is some of them our largest customers don't want to use this at all. They actually have other systems for monitoring it completely and then just pull it out or use the APIs to create that. So let's say you wanted to create a long-term data storage of how the thing was being used, or your application was being used. You can do it in conjunction with this and get login information, who's using the credits on those. So it's even cool to be able to provide back to your end customer saying, okay, here's something I can tell you, and you can do it right within your app if you wanted to.
So another example is if we take a look at feature storage, which is one of the more highly used components of ArcGIS Online, just because it is a way of storing your data. What you can do is click on the feature storage. You'll get a breakdown of standard feature data store. So that's the amount of data that you're being charged feature storage credits for. And then these file attachments. We actually charge differently for file attachments. They fall into file storage. So if you click on the standard feature storage, you can actually view the item details and get a little bit more information about which items are consuming more credits or are storing or aren't being used at all. So if we take a look at this, we can see that there's actually some really large feature sets in here that at least one of them hasn't been used for over three months, being this sea level rise 6 foot owned by me. So you can also go to the item, find out a little bit more about it. This is a great way of managing content that you're using and knowing exactly what content and who's using it within the organization. It's very easy to just sort by when it was created, and then you can figure out which types of content you want to keep around in your organization and which types of content you don't. All right. With the content tab in the status, you can also get an idea of who's creating content, what is popular content, and what the sharing summary is of your content. All right. It just works.
Sort of stay in the middle.
Okay. With the apps, you can get some more information about your apps, which ones are being viewed, and what are the popular apps in your organization. Members provides specific information about members in the organization. So if I want to find out a little bit more about another user, I can just hit change member. And then I can view my other members' content and what they've been creating and how many requests they've been accessing during the time period. Another new feature that we have for monitoring members is this ability to download an activity log. So you can access this also through the REST API, but what it does is it downloads events of your organization's activities. So you can download up to 10,000. Through the API, you can specify the dates. So if you want a little more, control over when you're querying the content from, I'd suggest checking it out through the API. But you can just download the CSV and then get a lot of information about the content, about what's been happening in your organization. So this tracks things like logins to different apps. You can see who's sharing, who's sharing content, who's creating content. If anyone's not able to log in, this is my favorite one, is to find out who has not been able to log in the past couple days, or has at least typed their password in wrong. But you can find out a lot of information about what's going on in your organization and what actions your users are taking. All right.
That just sort of touches on what you can get at and what you can do with it. I mean, that's the simplest of ways that we put it out there.
Yeah.
Is this for all organizations, or you can do it for users?
The history log is available for the whole organization. You can query per user or filter per user, either in an Excel document, or if you submit requests through the REST API, then you can send in those requests for just a specific user ID. This is one of the components that's just available in ArcGIS Online. We store the history information architecturally very different between ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise, but there is this information in ArcGIS Enterprise through the log files. You need to be a little creative on how you get that. But we do track it. We do track all of the same events. I'm still on this?
Yep.
Okay. Data management and configuration is another component of ArcGIS Online that is really helpful. So a lot of the times what we find our developers are doing is creating content either by feature layers or raster tile layers and embedding those into their own custom applications. So if data creation and data management is something that will be helpful for your apps, ArcGIS Online can be a really great way of accessing these capabilities. Everything's available for offline workflows, so there's the ability to synchronize content if you need access to it. You can create data and modify data with analytic tools like data enrichment and like the join features tool. So there's quite a few data management analytic tools available for use within ArcGIS Online. Collaboration between ArcGIS Enterprise and ArcGIS Online lets you bring those systems together. And then you can also configure layers for scalability. So there's a few ways of accessing additional scalability. Yeah.
Going to move, so I want to make sure and touch on what we're doing, but those are a number of the topics that we talked about are all sort of interrelated. You know, the user types, the authentication methods, and how people share. Those are all really fundamental, so they're all together. One slide to kind of wrap things up. So we've got an update coming on the 18th. If you're administrators of a subscription, you'll be getting an email in the next couple days with this information. But there's really three areas to think about.
19th.
The 19th?
Yeah.
It's the 19th.
The 19th.
Wow.
Sorry, it's a Monday.
We slipped a day?
Yeah, we slipped. No, yeah.
Just kidding.
Okay.
So there are three areas. New apps and enhancements to those apps, enterprise readiness, which is kind of what this talk has been about, and new capabilities. So let me start with the new apps and enhancements. In terms of the templates, we've got one with an interactive legend, so you can actually use that legend for exploring the data. It's pretty powerful. You just change the legend and you can see things on the map, highlight things on the map. A new category gallery of applications, maps or layers, so it's another way of showing a whole bunch of things together. Ops dashboard gets right to left enhancements for different languages support. Web app builder, one of the things that many people and not only our end customers have asked for, but developers have asked for too, is accessibility improvements. So we all have to meet lots of accessibility requirements, and we should be. There's lots of web app builder coming to do much of that. From an enterprise readiness and administration, so more along the lines of what we've been talking about today. Kelly touched on more rigorous support for passwords. So when you go to change your password, we're just lifting everything up a little bit. Much more complex passwords are going to be required when you change your password, but also when you're setting up a new account. No more of the simple things. Enterprise authentication can now include kind of licensing. So one of the things you couldn't do before if you were using enterprise logins was assign licenses at the same time. You'd be able to do that. There'll no longer be credit charges for watersheds, viewsheds, or tracking downstream. So those are analytics that you're using. There's no longer a credit charge for those. From a security standpoint, so we've been moving all of our content that's being stored to be encrypted. Everything now is encrypted at rest. New content and old content, it's all encrypted at rest. So if that's something you or your customers have been asking about, it's kind of a checkbox for many organizations, we've got that. And then geocoding. Performance improvements up to 20% in some cases. So lots of faster geocoding. Now, new capabilities. There is a really cool new feature to be able to take a zip file of photos that have the lat long built into the metadata of the photo. So something you would take with your phone, for example, you can automatically bring those in, create a feature service, and the photo comes along as an attachment. You'd be able to symbolize a feature, whether it has an attachment or not. So let me give you a use case. CAL FIRE here in California does surveys of structures, for example. And when there's not fires going out, the people in the field, the wildfire fighters, they actually do surveys of whether people have removed vegetation back from their house or not, and they take a picture. Well, they don't have them all. So one of the challenges they have for somebody in the field is to see what they have pictures of and what they don't. So you'll be able to symbolize them different ways and be able to do that. Search is improved by being able to search for location. That's been a long-standing one. And search also with partial words. So instead of completion of an entire word and then we do the search, as you're typing it, we're searching for it. And so lots of improvements there. So group owners can actually, so one of the things that somebody was talking about different people coming into groups. I've got all kinds of folks. End users don't always understand that there might be a layer and an app and lots of other things shared in a group. Now as a group owner, you can just say, okay, people who have access to this just see the applications. The other things might be there, but it doesn't confuse people who are trying to use them. And let's see, larger support for collaboration, so more things can be collaborated back and forth. And then in analytics, tessellations for analysis, so building a grid on top of something and using that for analysis. After March, just a couple of big things coming. More and more work on really large organizations. So anything you can do with one person or one item, we want to be able to do those in bulk. Being able to customize the home page. In the plenary, we talked about hosted notebooks and location tracking. Very big project that we're working on is a map viewer update. So we're moving the map viewer from JavaScript 3 to 4, which will mean lots of cool things that we can build into that. More configurable apps. And then, of course, all the time, we're always working on UX improvements, security updates, making it faster, and then content as well. So with that, good, we have a couple minutes. So questions up here.
I might just be a little confused with the pricing for those different users. So the editor role is $200 for every user?
I believe that is correct.
Yes.
In the US.
You're right.
Yeah.
So I guess, like I have a client that's a pretty large company and maybe the enterprise application I've developed for them has 500 users, and the kind of authentication model they're used to is, like their ARC server may be outdated and they're thinking about doing an upgrade. So if they're used to some on-prem deployment where they're integrating with like Active Directory federated services, if they're an identity provider and they're using 80 roles to give users some security, and in that model, like they're paying for their ARC server license, but it's $0 per user. Mm-hmm. Whereas if they upgrade to like 10.7 and then they use Portal and they use enterprise group linking, it sounds like, so like 200 times 500 would be like $10,000 per year upgrade. And that seems like that can't possibly be right. But
I think we would have to sit down and talk to you about I think there's something in the way you're describing it or something the way you're doing it. We should sit down with your account manager or whomever to talk to you about that, because I think there was a whole bunch of things mixed in there with enterprise and online and the pricing. And of course with enterprise, things like the viewer, you don't pay for that. But on online you do, because we're providing the infrastructure. You have that already with enterprise. So we can talk to you or get you hooked up to talk about that. Other questions here?
To clarify about the app login scheme, so even if you're the developer who's sort of being the front for that app and you have a bunch of content, can the users see it if it's not shared with everyone?
Users see.
If you're using the app login, then you can make that content. If you're using the app login, the app's going to need to be accessible to the public. So because you're not getting, like, if it's something where only specific users should access it, that's where you need to use the app login. If you're using, you need to use the named user login. If you're authenticating on behalf of the users, so you've created an app, you want them to be able to use the routing service, you can embed your credentials, but it would be shared publicly.
So the app is shared with everyone,
Yeah.
but the content behind the app would be private?
No, I don't.
No, the way that the app login would work is it would make that content accessible to everyone, because it would be authenticating as if you were logging in.
So basically, what you could do through that, so why would you do that, I guess is what it comes down to. So let's say there was some credit-using analytic that you wanted to include in an application, but you don't want your end users to log in. You would want to be able to track that back and log in so that you could use those credit-using services and then provide that service out to somebody else. But if you have...
So the content is accessible to everyone who has the app, but it's still marked as private or group shared online?
No.
Yeah, it would be marked.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be marked as private, or because you wouldn't, like, the app login would be doing the sharing.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
So if someone tried to search for it in ArcGIS Online, they wouldn't be able to find it unless they're going through your app. Okay.
On the very back.
I don't know if this is going to be covered in the full user management, but is there any future enhancement possibility for disabling users or security groups based upon a time constraint? Because we have a lot of seasonal employees and then also contract employees that have a known stop date. That would be great.
Okay, so to repeat the question, is there any way to, or are we thinking about ways to disable people or remove people from an organization in shorter amounts of periods than we do now, basically? We've tried to make that easy for folks. One of the things, we don't have subscriptions that are less than a year at this point, but we have been working with, like, probably the best example. Well, there's two really good examples. One is in the education space, where we have students coming in and out in an entire week. So we tried to work on some bulk ways of doing that. The other is in public safety, where you have 1,000 firefighters coming in and you want to enable them all, but they're done when the fire's out in a week and you want to do something else with those. So we do have ways of doing that. We just don't have the shorter subscriptions.
And I guess another question on that is it about managing that username and password, or managing, or managing, I guess, the licenses? Would you just need to be able to disable the users, those seasonal workers, or would you really need to be able to just purchase like a 3-month?
Just disable, because a lot of seasonal will come back.
Okay.
Okay.
It's a very specified time for the years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just disable so they don't have access to the content.
Yep.
by employees of the application.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think we actually went over a little bit. We'll stick around for a couple of minutes, but thank you very much.
Yep.